This is CyberSound, your simplified and fundamentals-focused source for all things cybersecurity.
Welcome to CyberSound. I'm your host, Jason Pufahl, today joined by Mark Jennings, part of the Vancord team and one of our resident experts on CMMC, which is our topic today. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you. Welcome.
So this feels a little bit like here we are again, July 13th. We had basically a rollback of CMMC requirements where, that looming assessment date was put on pause. And so, everybody who had been planning for, assessments with the 3 CPAOs that are out there, I guess, the positive side, will say have a reprieve because they have an opportunity maybe to make sure they're more fully prepared. But, I'd love if you wouldn't mind spending a minute on, where, what are the obligations for CMMC a little bit, and what does this assessment mean to people a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, and just a level set, what is being paused is the requirement to be fully CMMC Level 2 certified by November 10th if it shows up in your contract. So that's the key thing, is that the November 10th date was the date that supposedly all new DoD contracts were going to require full Level 2 certification in order to bid on the contract or accept the contract. That's the thing that's been paused, and it's been paused for 60 days so that they can review the program and does it make sense. A lot of the concerns that have been thrown out there have been that, for the SMB market, it's very difficult, that they're seeing manufacturers pull out of the market completely, saying, look, we just don't even want to play this game. There's not enough money in it, etc. So that's really the landscape that we have today. Is it's been paused. So, what do we do now?
But not necessarily stopped, right? Because their language is, we know that things are going to move forward, but how does it look? I think is a little bit the question.
Correct. So, there's nothing has changed at this point. Everything still stays in place. They're just pausing everything, which really we don't even know what that means. What's going to come out at the end of this? What we do know, though, is that the underlying requirements for that CMMC is there to certify are still there. If you do business with the DoD, more than likely there is a clause, the DFARS clause 252-204-7012, that has been around for 10 years. It's in there. That is the requirement that you meet the NIST 871 controls. There's a lot of acronyms and numbers in there, but that's that's the meat and potatoes of this, is that you have to meet these controls if you accept these contracts. Originally, it was on your word. Then it became you had to post a score that specifically said which ones you met and which ones you didn't. And now this certification is a third party comes in and assesses you. That's the big change. That's what CMMC is all about. CMMC has nothing to do other than the fact that it's a certification of the fact that you're meeting the controls.
Right. That you previously self-assessed against.
Correct.
Yeah.
And there's phase 1 is already in place, where if your contract says that you have to self-assess and attest to the fact that you are meeting CMMC or level 800-171 controls, that's already in place.
And none of that's changing, right, ultimately.
Exactly. That's still in place. The underlying controls are still in place. You still have all these obligations. The DIBCAC, which is the DoD assessment organization itself, can knock on your door anytime and say, I want to review your practices to make sure that you're following NIST 800-171. And if you're not, and if you posted a score in SPRS, which is how you assess how well you're doing, that is incorrect, you're in violation of the False Claims Act, which can have penalties up to 3 times the amount of the contract that you've been awarded. So all of these things still are there. This is not don't take any comfort in the fact that this program has been paused.
Well, and I think the positive, right? So they released an RFI where they're actually now seeking feedback from the defense industrial base on what's worked, what would they like to see changed, and I think they're looking at how do we actually make this work a little bit better, maybe for that SMB market that you referred to. At least that's my interpretation of it. I don't know if you have a different line of thinking, or if your outtake from that is different than mine.
Yeah, I mean, they absolutely in their announcement, said the reason they're pausing this is because of the SMB market. The Small Business Administration had a lot to do. They were pushing hard against this because in reality, there are some small manufacturers that have pulled out of the market. They've said, look, we just don't want to be in this business anymore. There's not enough money in it, whatever happens to be the case. And I've done some assessments for some like micro businesses that
Sure.
they don't make sense. I mean, it's almost embarrassing to be asking them, do you do this? It's like, why would a company that small put all these things, like there's independents out there, sole proprietors that have to meet these and they just go too far. So I don't argue the fact that there needs to be some sort of accommodation for, I'd say the micro small business. I
Yeah.
think, if you're 20, 25 employees or more, you should be doing this stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
it makes sense. So there's a segment of the population, yes, needs to be simplified, but overall, it's not a heavy lift for most organizations of, again, 20 employees or whatever.
Yeah.
So,
And honestly, the conversation I've had with the sort of companies in general, especially as some of the questions have arisen now as a result of this pause, has been most of these controls are controls that you would want to implement regardless of whether or not you had regulatory obligations. So, you want MFA, you want better password practices, you
yeah,
want to train your employee. Like there are some really high outcome, reasonable controls that every business should do no matter what. And if you haven't put those in place already, then that's a great place,
right,
frankly, for
right.
anybody who hasn't put the effort in yet to focus on. And then as the obligations become a little bit more clear, I think then maybe you can invest a little bit more. But these were laid out pretty practically
Mhm.
for most businesses, and I think they're just trying to make it a little bit more practical, even for all businesses.
Yeah, and as I said, I don't argue the fact that there is a segment of the business community that needs probably some relief from some of this stuff. But, the way that they've gone about it just by, we're going to do a pause for 60 days just leaves everybody in the scratching their head mode of what do I do now? My recommendation is full steam ahead. You may decide to pause your assessment dates or
Right.
push your assessment dates. That's, I probably would be looking at that if I were an organization, but I would not pause at all my preparation uh, for for these controls. Make sure that do whether you do a self assessment or have somebody a third party do a gap assessment. Keep going because you're not going to buy yourself any time through this if you just pause everything. So
Yeah, I mean, I mean, honestly, this is an opportunity for any organization that wasn't prepared for November
yeah.
to get prepared, right? And I think that's how people should be looking at it. And for me, speculate a little bit, I could envision a slightly reduced set of requirements, maybe for that SMB market,
Mhm.
but they're certainly not going to remove CMMC as an obligation.
No, and I mean, it's in law. I mean,
Yeah,
CMMC is a
yeah,
law. So I don't think, I'm not a lawyer and I'm not, I'm
yeah.
not a lawmaker. However, I don't think the Pentagon can just say, we're doing away with CMMC,
Yeah,
period.
we're done with this. Yeah,
It's going to take literally an act of Congress to do that. So, so I think there's comfort in that in the sense that, whatever investments you've made so far are not just going to go up in smoke. But I agree. I think, they did do this. They did release this thing they called a Brilliant at the Basics campaign, which is a quasi framework, kind of vague. These are the top 10 things you want to do in
right.
IT.
Yeah,
These are the top 10 things you want to do in OT. But it's nothing you can follow, nothing you can draw any kind of a conclusion as to whether or not you're meeting that standard because it's not really much of a standard. And a lot of those things are going to be just as cumbersome to a small business as NIST 800-171 is. So, and that again just throws more confusion. It's like, well, where are you going with this?
right.
So like I said, the bottom line is, I don't think this changes really anything other than, do you go forward with a C3PAO audit next week,
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah. It just changes that timeline.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we'll be keeping an eye on it, making sure that like whatever does come out of it makes sense. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it feels like a good spot to end, frankly, this little podcast, right? Because the reality is we're in the same boat as everybody, which is we know where we are today. We know what the obligations are to date for everybody. We'll see what the RFI produces in 60 days. We'll hopefully get some more information, at which time, we'll come back on and probably talk about that a little bit more. But it really is, it's business as usual in a lot of ways, maybe with a little bit of a buffer now in terms of that assessment obligation, and nothing else really changes.
Yeah. I mean, good news is I haven't had any clients, cancel, say we're dropping the whole thing. I mean, everybody, there might have been, okay, we might want to slow down a little bit just because, it's a lot of pressure, but nobody's stopping, which is good.
And frankly, when this was first announced, I was concerned that might be a reaction, but largely that hasn't been the case.
Yeah.
Good. Well, on that note, I think it's a good spot to stop. We'll come back when we know more information, and depending on what it is, we'll try to add hopefully some clarity and perspective to it. In the interim, if anybody does have questions, we do a lot of CMMC work. We are RPOs. We generally do a lot of the assessments, sort of the pre-assessments and all that remediation work. Happy to have a conversation and add whatever clarity we can. And if you've got questions, just reach out, because we're happy to chat. And Mark, thanks for taking a few minutes and sharing your perspective on this.
Happy anytime, Jason. Thanks.
All right. Thanks. Bye.
Great. Thank you.
We'd love to hear your feedback. Feel free to get in touch at Vancord on LinkedIn. And remember, stay vigilant, stay resilient. This has been CyberSound.